In the vastness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a legend that makes even the most battle-hardened warriors pause in disbelief. They call her the Ghost of Terra, a human whose very name sends ripples through the Galactic Academy's halls. What could one small, fragile-looking human female have done to earn the respect and fear of species that have conquered entire star systems? The answer lies not in her weapons, not in her technology, but in something far more terrifying to alien minds: her refusal to surrender when surrender is the only logical choice. When the Academy's most elite instructors pulled up her classified battle records, expecting to find standard human bravado, they discovered something that challenged everything they believed about warfare, survival, and the supposed weakness of humanity. This is the story of Commander Sarah Chun, and the day the galaxy learned why humans don't just fight wars, they redefine them. The Galactic Military Academy stood as a monument to interstellar cooperation, its crystalline towers reaching toward the stars like fingers grasping for infinity. Within its walls, the greatest military minds from across the galaxy gathered to learn, to teach, and to prepare for the conflicts that inevitably arose between civilizations. Today, however, something unprecedented was about to unfold in Lecture Hall 7. Admiral Kextara, a towering Zentorian with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors with her emotions, stood before a holographic display that flickered with anticipation. Her yellow eyes swept across the assembled crowd of cadets and instructors, representing dozens of species from the most militarily advanced civilizations in known space. The Vorth with their mechanical enhancements, the psychic Melody whose thoughts moved faster than light, the ancient Karathi whose strategic minds had conquered 1,000 worlds. All were present for what had been billed as a routine case study analysis. Today, we examine a battle record that has been classified for the past 3 standard years, Kextara announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across multiple star systems. The engagement took place in the Outer Rim territories, specifically the Kepler 442 system, during what humans refer to as the Salvation War. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. The Salvation War was legendary, though details remained scarce. What was known was that a single human colony had somehow held off an invasion force that should have overwhelmed them in minutes. The exact details had been sealed by the Galactic Council, deemed too sensitive for public consumption. Commander Vorthak, a cybernetically enhanced warrior whose species had perfected the art of tactical analysis, leaned forward in his seat. His red optical sensors focused on the display with mechanical precision. "Admiral, if I may ask, why has this particular engagement been chosen for analysis? Surely there are more relevant contemporary conflicts to examine." Kextara's skin shifted to a deeper blue, indicating her amusement. "An excellent question, Commander. The answer is simple. This engagement represents the most significant tactical anomaly in recorded military history. The parameters of the conflict defy conventional strategic logic to such a degree that our best tactical computers still cannot adequately explain the outcome." She gestured toward the holographic display, which began to materialize a 3-dimensional representation of the Kepler 442 system. The primary star glowed with a warm yellow light, surrounded by several planets, asteroid belts, and the scattered debris of what had once been a thriving trade route. The defending force consisted of a single human colony settlement on Kepler 442b, which the humans had designated as Hope's End. The settlement housed approximately 50,000 civilians, mostly families of terraforming engineers, agricultural specialists, and mineral extraction workers. Their military assets were minimal. The display zoomed in on the planet, revealing a small cluster of domed structures connected by underground tunnels. Around the settlement, vast fields of engineered crops stretched toward the horizon, while mining operations dotted the nearby mountain ranges. It looked peaceful, almost pastoral, certainly not like a fortress that could withstand a military assault. Professor Yalmoth, An elderly Karathi whose tentacles twitched with scholarly interest raised one of his appendages. What constituted their defensive capabilities? Surely they possessed some form of orbital defense network or standing military force. Negative, Kextera replied, her skin now a neutral green. The colony possessed 3 small atmospheric fighters, originally designed for cargo transport and modified with basic weapon systems. Their ground-based defenses consisted of a perimeter fence, 12 automated turrets designed primarily for wildlife deterrence, and a garrison of 37 colonial security officers. The number caused a collective intake of breath from the assembled crowd. 37 defenders for 50,000 civilians was barely a skeleton crew by any civilized standard. Most species would have considered such a settlement to be completely defenseless. Cadet Zephyra, a young Melody whose psychic abilities were still developing, projected her confusion directly into the minds of those nearby. Her thoughts carried the innocence of youth as she asked, "Admiral, what manner of force was arrayed against such a small defensive capability?" The holographic display shifted, revealing a massive fleet formation that materialized in the outer system like a swarm of metallic locusts. The ships bore the distinctive angular designs of the hegemony, a militaristic alliance of species that had been expanding aggressively through the Outer Rim territories. The attacking force consisted of the hegemony's 7th Expeditionary Fleet, Kextera announced, her voice taking on the clinical tone of a military briefer. 237 vessels, including 15 Dreadnought-class battleships, 43 heavy cruisers, 78 destroyers, and supporting logistics ships. Total personnel, approximately 150,000 military personnel, not including the 30,000 ground assault troops carried by their troop transports. The scale of the disparity was staggering. Every military mind in the room understood the mathematics of warfare. When one side possessed overwhelming superiority in numbers, technology, and firepower, the outcome was inevitable. This should have been a textbook example of a one-sided massacre, remembered only as a cautionary tale about the importance of adequate defensive preparations. The hegemony's objective was straightforward, Kextera continued. Capture the colony's terraforming equipment, enslave the population for labor purposes, and establish a forward operating base for further expansion into human territory. Intelligence indicated that resistance would be minimal to non-existent. Standard doctrine called for a demonstration bombardment, followed by immediate surrender negotiations. Commander Vorthack's optical sensors narrowed as he processed the tactical situation. "Admiral, I must confess confusion regarding the purpose of this exercise. The outcome seems predetermined. Even assuming the humans possessed hidden defensive capabilities, the numerical disparity is simply too great to overcome. Are we perhaps examining this as a case study in the importance of intelligence gathering and defensive preparedness?" Kextera's skin shifted to a deep purple, indicating something that might have been admiration mixed with bewilderment. "Commander, I assure you that by the end of this presentation, you will understand why this engagement has been classified at the highest levels. The outcome was indeed predetermined, but not in the way that conventional military wisdom would suggest." She manipulated the holographic controls, causing the display to focus on a small section of the colony. The image revealed a modest building that appeared to be some form of administrative center. Outside, a group of humans could be seen engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. At the time of the hegemony fleet's arrival, the colony's defense was under the nominal command of Security Chief Marcus Webb, a former military police officer with no combat experience. However, among the civilian population was one individual whose presence would fundamentally alter the course of the engagement. The display zoomed in further, revealing a human female of unremarkable appearance. She appeared to be in her early 30s by human standards, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style and clothing that suggested she was involved in some form of technical work. Nothing about her appearance would have suggested to any military observer that she possessed any combat capabilities whatsoever. "Meet Dr. Sarah Chun," Kextera announced. Officially listed in the colony records as a xenobiologist studying the planet's indigenous ecosystem. Her academic credentials were impeccable, multiple degrees in biology, ecology, and environmental systems. She had been on Hope's End for 2 years, conducting research that was considered routine and non-classified. Cadet Zephyra projected another thought question, her mental voice tinged with confusion. "Admiral, how does a xenobiologist become relevant to a military engagement of this magnitude?" "An excellent question, Cadet," Kextera replied. "The answer lies in what Dr. Chen's official records did not reveal. You see, her credentials, while accurate, were incomplete. What the hegemony intelligence files failed to discover was that before becoming a xenobiologist, Sarah Chun had served as a lieutenant commander in the Human Strategic Defense Force." The room fell silent as the implications began to register. Human military forces were still something of a mystery to many galactic civilizations. Humanity was relatively new to the interstellar community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years earlier. Their military doctrine was largely unknown, their capabilities unproven on a galactic scale. But even that information would have been insufficient to predict what followed. Kextera continued, her skin now cycling through multiple colors in rapid succession, a clear sign of emotional complexity. What the hegemony could not have known was that Dr. Chen's service record contained multiple classified entries. She had not simply served as a lieutenant commander. She had served as a lieutenant commander in the Human Special Operations Division, with a specialty in asymmetric warfare and survival tactics. Professor Yalmath's tentacles began to writhe with interest. "Admiral, are you suggesting that this single individual possessed combat capabilities that could meaningfully impact an engagement of this scale? Even assuming exceptional training, the mathematical realities of the situation would seem to make individual prowess irrelevant." Kextera gestured toward the display, which began to show the initial moments of the hegemony fleet's approach. The massive ships moved with the ponderous confidence of predators approaching helpless prey, their weapons powered down to minimum levels, their shields at standby status. This was not expected to be a battle. It was expected to be a harvesting operation. "Professor, you are correct that individual prowess should have been irrelevant. However, what our analysis has revealed is that human asymmetric warfare doctrine operates on fundamentally different principles than conventional military thinking. Where most civilizations would focus on force multiplication through technology or numerical superiority, humans appear to have developed strategies based on what they term adaptive improvisation and tactical creativity. The display showed the moment when the hegemony fleet achieved orbit and began broadcasting their surrender demands. The transmission was standard for such operations, a list of terms that offered survival in exchange for immediate capitulation, backed by the implicit threat of orbital bombardment for noncompliance. The colony's leadership was, understandably, preparing to surrender, Kextera explained. Security Chief Webb had already begun drafting the formal capitulation document when Dr. Chun requested a private consultation. The details of that conversation remain classified, but the outcome was that Webb agreed to transfer tactical command to her for a period of 72 hours. Commander Vorthak's optical sensors flared with disbelief. "Admiral, surely you cannot mean that an entire colony's fate was placed in the hands of a single individual with no command experience relevant to the situation?" "That is precisely what occurred, Commander," Kextera confirmed. And it was at that moment that everything the hegemony believed about human military capabilities began to unravel. The holographic display shifted to show Dr. Chun addressing the colony's security personnel. Even through the grainy surveillance footage, her transformation was evident. The mild-mannered scientist had disappeared, replaced by someone whose posture and bearing spoke of absolute confidence and tactical clarity. Dr. Chen's first action was to request a complete inventory of the colony's resources, Kextera continued. Not just military assets, but everything, industrial equipment, scientific instruments, raw materials, even waste products. Her second action was to draft a response to the hegemony's surrender demand. The display showed the text of the message that was transmitted to the orbiting fleet. It was brief, written in standard diplomatic language, but its content sent a ripple of shock through the assembled Academy audience. The message read, "Hegemony forces are advised that Hope's end colony does not recognize the legitimacy of your territorial claims or the authority under which you operate. Your presence in this system constitutes an act of aggression against civilian populations in violation of galactic law. You are ordered to withdraw immediately or face the consequences of hostile action against human territory." Professor Yalmoth's tentacles stopped their writhing as his ancient mind processed the implications. "Admiral, surely this message was intended as a negotiating tactic? A delay mechanism to buy time for evacuation or diplomatic intervention?" Kextara's skin had settled into a deep blue that indicated profound respect mixed with bewilderment. "Negative, Professor. Analysis of Dr. Chen's subsequent actions indicates that she genuinely intended to resist the hegemony invasion force. Moreover, her tactical preparations suggest that she believed she could achieve not merely successful defense, but actual victory." The room erupted in a cacophony of sounds as representatives from dozens of species expressed their disbelief. Mechanical clicking from the Vorth, harmonic resonances from the crystalline shard high, psychic projection burst from the melody, all conveying the same fundamental reaction. Such a belief was not merely optimistic, it was completely divorced from military reality. "Silence," Kextara commanded, her voice cutting through the noise with parade ground authority. "I understand your skepticism. It mirrors the reaction of every military analyst who has reviewed this case. However, I remind you that we are here to examine what actually occurred, not what should have occurred according to conventional wisdom." The display returned to the colony, where Dr. Chun had begun implementing what could only be described as the most audacious defensive strategy in recorded military history. She had divided the colony's 37 security personnel into 7 teams, each assigned to specific sectors of the defensive perimeter. More surprisingly, she had also organized the civilian population into support roles, not as combatants, but as an integrated logistics and intelligence network. The hegemony's response to the colony's defiant message was predictable, Kextara continued. Fleet Admiral Thakmar ordered a demonstration bombardment of uninhabited areas near the colony, followed by a second surrender demand with a much shorter timeline for compliance. When that deadline passed without response, he authorized the deployment of ground forces. The holographic display showed the launch of hegemony assault shuttles from the orbiting fleet. Hundreds of craft descended through the planet's atmosphere like metallic rain, carrying the first wave of 30,000 troops equipped with advanced weapons and armor. Their objective was simple: secure the colony within 6 hours with minimal damage to valuable infrastructure. It was at this point, Kextara said, her voice taking on an almost reverent tone, that Dr. Sarah Chun began to demonstrate why human military doctrine represents a fundamental paradigm shift in galactic warfare theory. The display focused on the moment of first contact between hegemony ground forces and the colony's defenders. What followed defied every principle of military logic that the Academy's instructors had ever taught. Instead of a traditional defensive posture, the human security teams appeared to be conducting what could only be described as aggressive retreats, falling back through prepared positions while inflicting casualties far disproportionate to their numbers. But more puzzling was their coordination with civilian elements who seemed to be providing real-time intelligence and logistical support that enabled the defenders to anticipate hegemony movements before they occurred. The initial hegemony casualty reports indicated losses that their field commanders dismissed as statistical anomalies, Kextara explained. However, as the engagement continued, it became clear that something unprecedented was occurring on the battlefield. The Academy audience watched in stunned silence as the holographic display showed hegemony forces becoming increasingly disoriented and frustrated. Units that should have been advancing steadily through the colony were instead finding themselves engaged in running battles with defenders who seemed to materialize from nowhere, strike with devastating effectiveness, and then vanish before reinforcements could arrive. By the end of the first day, Kextara concluded the hegemony had suffered over 3,000 casualties while failing to secure a single strategic objective within the colony. Their ground commander requested permission to begin orbital bombardment, despite standing orders to preserve the infrastructure. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in among her audience. 37 human defenders had not merely survived contact with 30,000 attacking troops. They had actively prevented those troops from achieving their objectives while inflicting catastrophic losses in return. Fleet Admiral Thakmar denied the bombardment request. Kextara continued, but authorized the deployment of the second wave of ground forces, bringing the total hegemony strength to 60,000 troops. He also implemented a complete orbital blockade to prevent any possibility of external assistance reaching the colony. The holographic display showed the nighttime hours of the first day, when conventional military wisdom suggested that human defenders should have been at their greatest disadvantage. Hegemony forces possessed superior night vision capabilities, thermal imaging, and detection equipment that should have made the darkness their ally. Instead, the opposite occurred. Human casualties remained minimal while hegemony losses accelerated. Security teams that had been driven from their positions during daylight hours seemed to return with the darkness, striking at supply lines, communication nodes, and command posts with an accuracy that suggested intimate knowledge of hegemony tactical doctrine. The second day began with a coordinated hegemony assault utilizing their most advanced combat units. Kextara narrated as the display showed heavily armored troops advancing behind mechanized support vehicles. These forces represented the elite of their military, soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds, equipped with weapons that could level entire city blocks. The Academy audience leaned forward collectively as the holographic display revealed the moment of contact between these elite forces and whatever defensive preparations Dr. Chun had implemented overnight. What they saw challenged their fundamental understanding of how warfare functioned. The hegemony advanced ground to a halt, not because of superior firepower or impregnable fortifications, but because the battlefield itself seemed to be actively working against them. Equipment malfunctioned at critical moments. Supply lines were severed by means that remained unclear, and communication systems experienced interference that prevented coordinated operations. Analysis of recovered hegemony equipment revealed modifications consistent with advanced electronic warfare capabilities, Kextara explained. However, the colony's technical resources should have been insufficient to generate such effects. Moreover, the sophistication of the countermeasures increased as the engagement progressed, suggesting adaptive learning that exceeded the capabilities of any known artificial intelligence systems. Cadet Zephyra projected another mental question, her thoughts now tinged with awe rather than confusion. Admiral, how was such electronic warfare capability generated by a civilian colony with minimal technical resources? Kextara's skin shifted through multiple colors before settling on a pattern that indicated deep intellectual appreciation mixed with professional bewilderment. Cadet, that question represents one of the central mysteries of this engagement. Post-battle analysis suggests that Dr. Chun had somehow transformed the colony's industrial and scientific equipment into an integrated defensive network that operated according to principles our technical specialists still do not fully understand. The implications were staggering. If accurate, it meant that a single human had improvised military capabilities that surpassed the technological achievements of civilizations that had been perfecting warfare for millennia. As the first part of the presentation concluded, the Academy audience sat in contemplative silence, struggling to process what they had witnessed. They had come expecting a routine case study in military tactics. Instead, they had encountered evidence that their fundamental assumptions about warfare, technology, and human capabilities might be completely incorrect. Admiral Kextara's final words before dismissing them for analysis and discussion carried a weight that would resonate through the Academy's halls for years to come. Tomorrow, we will examine days 3 through 5 of the engagement. I suggest you spend this evening reconsidering everything you believe you know about the nature of military conflict. The second day at the Galactic Military Academy found Lecture Hall 7 packed beyond capacity. Word had spread throughout the institution about Admiral Kextara's presentation, and now representatives from dozens of additional species had arrived to witness what was being called the most significant military analysis in Academy history. The air hummed with anticipation as beings from across the galaxy gathered to hear the continuation of a story that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Admiral Kextara entered to find her audience expanded far beyond the original group. Senior instructors who normally would never attend a tactical case study sat alongside intelligence specialists, xenobiologists, and even diplomatic attaches who had requested special permission to attend. The presence of Fleet Admiral Jintak, the Academy's commanding officer, indicated that this briefing had attracted attention at the highest levels of galactic military command. "I see our audience has grown," Kextara observed, her skin displaying the subtle orange patterns that indicated amusement. "Before we continue, I must emphasize that today's material remains classified at the highest levels. What you will witness challenges fundamental assumptions about military capabilities that form the basis of current strategic doctrine across multiple civilizations." She activated the holographic display, which immediately materialized the chaotic scene that had developed around Hope's end colony by the beginning of the third day. Hegemony forces were now concentrated in a tightening circle around the human settlement. But instead of the orderly siege lines that military doctrine would have predicted, their positions appeared fragmented and confused. By dawn of the third day, the Hegemony ground commander faced a situation that defied conventional military analysis. Kextara began. Despite deploying 60,000 troops against 37 defenders, he had not only failed to achieve his objectives, but had lost operational control of the battlefield itself. The display zoomed in to show individual Hegemony units, their movements erratic and uncoordinated. Communications equipment sparked and failed at random intervals. Supply convoys found themselves lost despite sophisticated navigation systems, and even their most advanced sensors reported contradictory data about enemy positions and movements. Commander Vorthak, whose cybernetic enhancements had been working throughout the night to analyze the previous day's data, raised one of his mechanical appendages. "Admiral, our analysis protocols have encountered significant anomalies in the tactical data you presented yesterday. The electronic warfare effects described appear to exceed the theoretical capabilities of any known technology. Are we examining accurate historical records, or perhaps a training simulation designed to test our analytical capabilities?" Kextara's skin shifted to a deep blue that indicated complete seriousness. "Commander, I assure you that every detail you will witness has been verified through multiple independent sources. The Hegemony's own battle records, recovered communications logs, and post-engagement interviews with survivors all confirm these events. The tactical data appears impossible precisely because it documents capabilities that our current understanding of warfare cannot adequately explain." She gestured toward the display, which began showing the early morning hours of the third day. Dr. Sarah Chun appeared in the holographic representation, moving through the colony's underground tunnel system with a confidence that suggested intimate familiarity with every passage and chamber. Around her, the civilian population continued their assigned tasks with an efficiency that spoke of careful preparation and unwavering trust in their improvised commander. Dr. Chin's activities during the night hours of the second day remained largely unobserved by Hegemony forces, Kextara explained. However, surveillance equipment positioned by the colony security teams captured extensive footage of her preparations for what she termed Phase 2 of the defensive operation. The holographic display revealed a scene that defied military comprehension. Dr. Chun was shown working with the colony's industrial fabrication equipment, but instead of producing conventional weapons or defensive barriers, She appeared to be creating devices that bore no resemblance to any known military technology. Cylindrical objects with complex internal structures, crystalline formations that pulsed with strange energies, and network components that seemed designed for purposes that remained entirely unclear. Professor Yalmoth's tentacles writhed with scientific curiosity as he examined the strange devices. Admiral, can your analysis teams provide any insight into the function of these constructions? The energy patterns visible in the recordings suggest principles that extend beyond conventional engineering. Professor, that question touches on one of the most classified aspects of this entire engagement, Kextera replied, her skin now displaying patterns of deep purple that indicated information being withheld for security reasons. What I can tell you is that Dr. Chen's background in xenobiology proved to be far more relevant to military applications than anyone could have predicted. Her research into the indigenous ecosystem of Hopes and had uncovered certain properties of local organisms that could be adapted for defensive purposes. The implications sent a ripple of unease through the assembled audience. The idea that biological systems could be weaponized for large-scale military operations touched on ethical boundaries that many civilizations considered inviolable. However, the evidence before them suggested that Dr. Chun had somehow found ways to integrate living systems with technological components to create capabilities that transcended the limitations of either approach individually. The third day began with the hegemony's most ambitious assault yet. Kextera continued, manipulating the display to show massive formations of troops advancing toward the colony from multiple directions simultaneously. Fleet Admiral Thakmar had become personally involved in tactical planning, determined to end what he considered an embarrassing delay in routine operations. The attacking forces represented the cream of the hegemony military. Elite shock troops equipped with powered armor, heavy weapons platforms capable of leveling buildings, and air support from atmospheric fighters that should have made resistance impossible. Their advance began with a coordinated bombardment designed to suppress any defensive positions, followed by simultaneous assaults on 6 different sectors of the colony's perimeter. The human response to this assault provides our first direct evidence of the tactical innovations that Dr. Chun had implemented, Kextera announced. Rather than attempting to hold fixed defensive positions, the colony's security teams initiated what can only be described as adaptive defensive maneuvers that responded to hegemony movements in real time. The holographic display showed the moment when the hegemony assault forces made contact with the colony's outer defenses. Instead of encountering the expected resistance from prepared positions, they found themselves facing a defensive network that seemed to shift and evolve as the battle progressed. Defensive positions that appeared abandoned would suddenly become active again, striking at vulnerable flanks and rear areas. Supply lines that had been secure moments before would come under attack from directions that sensors indicated were clear. Cadet Zephyra projected her mental voice directly into Kextera's consciousness, her thoughts now carrying the disciplined focus of a military mind rather than the curiosity of a student. Admiral, the defensive patterns appear to demonstrate coordination that exceeds the capabilities of the human forces communication systems. How is such tactical awareness achieved? Kextera paused, her skin cycling through multiple colors as she considered how much classified information she could reveal. Cadet, your observation touches on what our analysts consider to be the most significant innovation demonstrated during this engagement. Dr. Chen appears to have developed what she termed a biological intelligence network that provided tactical awareness capabilities that surpassed anything achieved through conventional technology. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled audience. Biological intelligence networks were theoretical concepts that had been discussed in academic circles for decades, but the technical challenges involved in creating such systems had been considered insurmountable. The idea that a single individual could not only solve these problems, but implement a working system during a combat situation stretched credibility to its absolute limits. The evidence for this network's existence comes from multiple sources, Kextera continued, responding to the obvious skepticism in her audience. Hegemony Communications intercepts documented instances of human forces responding to tactical developments before conventional intelligence gathering would have made such responses possible. Moreover, the coordination demonstrated between widely separated defensive positions exceeded what human communication systems could have achieved given the electronic warfare conditions present on the battlefield. The holographic display shifted to show a bird's-eye view of the entire engagement area. The hegemony forces, represented as red indicators, moved in the standard patterns that military doctrine would dictate for such an operation. However, the human defensive responses, shown in blue, demonstrated movement patterns that seemed to anticipate hegemony actions rather than merely react to them. Commander Vorthak's optical sensors focused intently on the tactical display as his analytical subroutines processed the implications. Admiral, if such a network existed, it would represent a quantum leap in military intelligence capabilities. The strategic advantages of real-time tactical awareness across an entire battlefield would fundamentally alter the balance of any conflict. Precisely, Commander, Kextera agreed. And that realization was apparently not lost on Fleet Admiral Thakmar. By midday of the third day, hegemony forces had suffered an additional 5,000 casualties while advancing less than 2 kilometers toward their objectives. More significantly, their ammunition expenditure rates were approaching critical levels despite facing an enemy force that should have been eliminated within hours. The display showed the growing frustration among hegemony field commanders as their carefully planned assault operations devolved into chaotic skirmishes with an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Units would advance into areas that appeared clear, only to find themselves surrounded and under attack from concealed positions that their sensors had failed to detect. When reinforcements arrived, the attackers would have vanished, leaving behind only the evidence of their devastating effectiveness. It was at this point that Dr. Chun initiated what her tactical logs refer to as asymmetric escalation, Kextera announced, her voice taking on the tone of someone describing events that still challenged her understanding. Rather than continuing purely defensive operations, she authorized her security teams to begin offensive actions against hegemony, staging areas, and support infrastructure. The very concept sent another wave of disbelief through the Academy audience. Offensive operations implied the ability to project force beyond the immediate defensive perimeter, something that should have been impossible for forces so heavily outnumbered and outgunned. Yet the holographic display began showing exactly such operations as human security teams somehow penetrated hegemony lines to strike at command posts, supply depots, and communication centers. Professor Yalmoth's tentacles had stopped their normal writhing and were now held rigid with concentration. Admiral, offensive operations of this nature would require detailed intelligence about enemy positions, movement patterns, and defensive capabilities. How could such intelligence be gathered by forces under siege? Professor, that question brings us to another aspect of Dr. Chen's biological intelligence network, Kextera replied. Analysis of recovered hegemony equipment revealed evidence of infiltration by microscopic organisms indigenous to Hope's End. These organisms appeared to have been modified to serve reconnaissance functions, providing the defenders with detailed information about hegemony positions and activities. The implications were staggering. If accurate, it meant that Dr. Chun had somehow created a surveillance network using living organisms that could penetrate enemy positions without detection. Such capabilities would make traditional military secrecy impossible and provide defenders with intelligence advantages that no technological system could match. The afternoon of the third day marked the beginning of what hegemony records describe as systemic operational failure. Kextera continued. Equipment malfunctions began occurring at rates that exceeded statistical probability. Communication systems experienced increasing interference, and even their most basic logistical operations became unreliable. The holographic display showed hegemony forces struggling with problems that seemed to multiply faster than they could be addressed. Vehicles broke down for reasons that field mechanics could not identify. Weapon systems suffered targeting failures that prevented accurate fire. And even personal equipment like environmental suits began experiencing malfunctions that forced troops to retreat to safe areas. Post-battle analysis by hegemony technical specialists concluded that their equipment had been subjected to some form of biological contamination that interfered with electronic systems, Kextera explained. However, the nature of this contamination remained unclear, as it did not conform to any known form of biological warfare. Cadet Zephyr's mental projection carried a note of awe mixed with concern. Admiral, are you suggesting that Dr. Chen weaponized the planet's ecosystem against the invading forces? Kextera's skin displayed the complex patterns that indicated she was sharing information that challenged her own understanding. Cadet, the evidence suggests that Dr. Chen found ways to encourage indigenous organisms to interact with hegemony technology in ways that produced defensive advantages for the colony. Whether this constitutes weaponization in the traditional sense remains a matter of debate among our analysts. The distinction was important from both tactical and ethical perspectives. Traditional biological warfare involved the deliberate creation and deployment of organisms designed to cause harm. What Dr. Chen appeared to have achieved was the coordination of naturally occurring organisms to create effects that happened to be militarily advantageous. The implications for future conflict were profound, suggesting that human military doctrine might include capabilities that other civilizations had never considered possible. By evening of the third day, Fleet Admiral Thakmar faced a decision that no hegemony commander had ever been forced to make, Kextera announced. Despite possessing overwhelming numerical and technological superiority, his forces had not only failed to achieve their objectives, but were actively losing ground to an enemy that should have been incapable of meaningful resistance. The display showed the hegemony fleet in orbit above Hope's End, their massive ships maintaining perfect formation while the chaos below continued to defy military logic. Communications between the fleet and ground forces revealed growing desperation among field commanders who could not explain their failures to superiors who had expected routine success. Thakmar's response was to authorize the deployment of his strategic reserve forces, Kextera continued. An additional 30,000 troops, including elite units that had never experienced defeat in over a century of military operations. These forces represented the absolute pinnacle of hegemony military capability. The implications were clear to every military mind in the Academy audience. If 90,000 troops could not overwhelm 37 defenders, then fundamental assumptions about warfare itself were incorrect. Either the hegemony was far less militarily capable than intelligence assessments indicated, or human defensive capabilities exceeded anything that galactic civilization had previously encountered. The strategic reserve forces landed during the night hours, equipped with the most advanced technology available to the hegemony military. Kextera explained as the display showed massive transport ships disgorging fresh troops and equipment onto the planet's surface. Their mission was simple: end the engagement within 12 hours through the application of overwhelming force. The new arrivals brought with them weapons that could level entire city blocks, armor that could withstand direct hits from artillery, and detection systems that could identify hidden positions from orbit. Their commanders were veterans of dozens of successful planetary conquests, their troops trained in urban warfare techniques that had proven successful across hundreds of worlds. It was at this point, Kextera announced, her voice carrying an almost reverential tone, that Dr. Sarah Chen demonstrated the final aspect of her defensive strategy. The phase that her tactical logs refer to simply as ecosystem integration. The holographic display shifted to show the colony itself, where something unprecedented was beginning to occur. The very landscape around the human settlement appeared to be changing, as if the planet itself was responding to the conflict taking place on its surface. Plants grew with unnatural speed, creating barriers and concealment where none had existed before. Underground root systems formed networks that seemed designed to disrupt enemy movements. Even the local weather patterns began to shift in ways that favored the defenders. The Academy audience sat in stunned silence as they witnessed what could only be described as a planet actively participating in its own defense. Such capabilities were beyond anything that galactic military science had ever documented, representing a form of warfare that transcended the boundary between technology and nature. The fourth day began with the hegemony's final assault. Kexthara concluded. 120,000 troops, supported by orbital fire control, and equipped with weapons designed to conquer entire star systems, advancing against a colony that had somehow transformed itself into something that defied conventional military categorization. She paused, allowing the magnitude of what they had witnessed to settle in the minds of her audience. Tomorrow, we will examine the conclusion of the engagement and discuss its implications for future military doctrine. I suggest you spend this evening reconsidering not just your assumptions about warfare, but your assumptions about the relationship between civilization and the natural universe itself. As the Academy audience filed out of Lecture Hall 7, their conversations carried a new tone of uncertainty mixed with professional curiosity. They had come to learn about military tactics, and instead found themselves confronting evidence that the universe contained forms of warfare they had never imagined possible. The story of Dr. Sarah Chun and the defense of Hope's End was forcing them to reconsider fundamental questions about the nature of conflict, intelligence, and the hidden capabilities of species they thought they understood. The third day of Admiral Kexthara's presentation found Lecture Hall 7 transformed into something resembling a war council of the galaxy's greatest military minds. Fleet admirals from 7 different civilizations sat alongside legendary tactical theorists, xenobiological specialists, and intelligence analysts who had been summoned from across known space. The Galactic Council itself had dispatched observers to witness what was being called the most significant military case study in recorded history. Admiral Kexthara entered to find her audience had expanded beyond the Academy's normal capacity. Emergency seating had been arranged, and holographic viewing areas had been established in adjacent halls to accommodate the overflow of beings desperate to witness the conclusion of a story that was challenging everything they believed about warfare. The presence of Supreme Fleet Admiral Corvain, commander of the entire Galactic Defense Force, indicated that this briefing had transcended academic interest to become a matter of strategic importance at the highest levels. Before we begin today's session, I must address the questions that have been raised regarding the authenticity of yesterday's material. Kexthara announced, her skin displaying the formal patterns that indicated official communications. Supreme Fleet Admiral Corvain has authorized me to confirm that all tactical data presented in this analysis has been verified through multiple independent sources. Moreover, elements of what you will witness today have been corroborated through direct testimony from hegemony survivors who agreed to provide statements in exchange for clemency considerations. The confirmation sent a ripple of tension through the assembled audience. If hegemony forces had actually testified to the events described, then the implications extended far beyond academic military theory. Real capabilities of this magnitude would reshape the strategic balance of power throughout the galaxy. Supreme Fleet Admiral Corvain, an ancient Karathi whose tactical brilliance was legendary even among species that had perfected warfare over millennia, raised one of his primary appendages. Admiral Kexthara, before we proceed, I require clarification on a matter of strategic significance. Are we examining an isolated incident involving exceptional circumstances, or are we documenting capabilities that represent standard human military doctrine? Kexthara's skin shifted through multiple colors before settling on a pattern that indicated information that remained classified beyond her clearance level. Supreme Admiral, that question touches on intelligence assessments that exceed my authorization to discuss. What I can confirm is that Dr. Sarachen's background and capabilities appear to represent training and knowledge that exists within human military systems, rather than unique individual innovation. The implication was staggering. If Chen's abilities were representative of broader human military capabilities rather than exceptional individual talent, then every strategic assessment of human military potential would need to be completely revised. The possibility that humanity possessed military doctrines capable of producing such results suggested that Earth's strategic value and threat potential have been catastrophically underestimated. Today we examine the fourth and fifth days of the engagement. Kextara continued, activating the holographic display to show the chaotic scene that had developed around Hope's and colony. By dawn of the fourth day, the hegemony had committed virtually their entire expeditionary force to what should have been a routine occupation operation. 120,000 troops, supported by 237 orbital vessels, facing a colonial settlement that had somehow transformed into something that defied conventional military classification. The display revealed a battlefield that bore no resemblance to any documented military engagement in galactic history. Hegemony forces occupied positions that formed an irregular perimeter around the colony, but instead of the ordered siege lines that doctrine would dictate, their formations appeared fragmented and confused. Equipment failures had reached epidemic proportions, communication systems functioned sporadically, and even basic navigation had become unreliable. More disturbing was the transformation of the landscape itself. The indigenous ecosystem around Hope's and had undergone changes that military analysts still could not adequately explain. Plant growth patterns had created natural barriers and concealment that seemed designed to channel enemy movements into predetermined killing zones. Underground route networks had destabilized hegemony defensive positions while somehow leaving human installations undamaged. Even local weather patterns appeared to favor the defenders, with fog and atmospheric disturbances occurring at moments that provided tactical advantages to human forces. Commander Vorthak, whose cybernetic systems have been working continuously to analyze the tactical data, projected his findings onto a secondary display. Admiral, our computational models indicate that the environmental modifications observed around the colony exceed the natural adaptation rates of indigenous species by several orders of magnitude. The timescale involved suggests artificial acceleration of biological processes through means that remain unclear. Professor Yalmath's tentacles writhed with scientific excitement as he examined Vorthak's analysis. Commander, your data supports theoretical models for controlled evolutionary acceleration that our xenobiological departments have considered impossible to implement in practical applications. If Dr. Chun somehow achieved such capabilities using colonial resources, it would represent a breakthrough in applied biology that exceeds the achievements of civilizations that have studied these fields for millennia. Kextara gestured toward the holographic display, which began showing the early hours of the fourth day as hegemony strategic reserve forces prepared for their final assault. These troops represented the absolute pinnacle of their military capability. Soldiers who had conquered entire star systems, equipped with weapons that could level cities, trained in tactics that had proven successful across hundreds of worlds. The strategic reserve forces began their assault at dawn, implementing a battle plan that their commanders considered foolproof, Kextara explained. Simultaneous advances from 8 directions, supported by orbital bombardment of suspected defensive positions, followed by immediate occupation of the colony's vital infrastructure. Intelligence assessments indicated that organized resistance would collapse within 2 hours. The display showed massive formations of troops advancing toward the colony with the confidence of predators approaching helpless prey. Their equipment functioned properly, their communication systems operated normally, and their sensors provided clear tactical information about the terrain ahead. For the first time since the engagement began, hegemony forces appeared to be operating according to standard military parameters. The initial phase of the assault proceeded exactly as planned, Kextara continued. Hegemony forces advanced steadily through the outer perimeter defenses, encountering only token resistance from human security teams that appeared to be conducting a fighting withdrawal toward the colony's central areas. Within 3 hours, attacking forces had occupied positions that placed them within direct assault range of the primary settlement. Cadet Zephyra projected her thoughts with the focused intensity that had marked her evolution from curious student to serious military analyst. Admiral, if the human defensive capabilities were as significant as previous evidence suggested, why did their resistance appear to collapse during this final assault? Kextara's skin displayed patterns that indicated appreciation for insightful questioning mixed with anticipation of dramatic revelation. Cadet, your observation demonstrates excellent tactical awareness. The apparent collapse of human resistance was indeed puzzling to hegemony field commanders, who had expected to encounter the same innovative defensive measures that had characterized the previous 3 days of combat. The holographic display shifted to show Dr. Sarah Chun during the early hours of the 4th day. Rather than appearing desperate or defeated, she moved through the colony's underground tunnels with the calm confidence of someone implementing a carefully planned strategy. Around her, civilian populations had been evacuated to secure areas, while security personnel took up positions that seemed designed for purposes that remained unclear. Dr. Chin's tactical logs from this period contain references to final phase implementation and ecosystem convergence protocols, Kextara explained. These terms had not appeared in her previous planning documents, suggesting that the 4th day marked the beginning of operations that had been held in reserve for the critical moment of the engagement. The implications sent a chill through the Academy audience. If the previous 3 days of unprecedented defensive capabilities had represented merely preliminary operations, then whatever Chen had prepared for the final phase exceeded anything that galactic military science had ever documented. The hegemony assault forces reached the colony's primary defensive perimeter at noon on the 4th day, Kextara announced. What they encountered there challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare itself. The display showed hegemony troops advancing through areas that their sensors indicated were clear of defenders. The approaches to the colony appeared unobstructed, with no visible defensive positions or obstacles that would impede their progress. Field commanders reported that resistance had apparently ceased entirely, leading some to speculate that the human defenders had finally recognized the futility of their situation. Instead, what occurred was something that no military doctrine in galactic history had ever anticipated. As hegemony forces advanced through what appeared to be abandoned defensive positions, the environment itself began to respond to their presence in ways that defied conventional understanding of biological systems. The first indication that something unprecedented was occurring came from reports of equipment failures that seemed to target specific systems at specific moments, Kextara explained. Weapons would malfunction precisely when they were needed for critical engagements, communication devices would fail during moments when coordination was essential, and even basic life support systems would experience problems that forced troops to retreat from advantageous positions. The display showed the growing confusion among hegemony forces as their advance began to falter despite the absence of visible opposition. Units would find themselves lost in terrain they had successfully navigated hours earlier. Navigation systems would provide contradictory information that led formations in circles. Even their most advanced sensors began reporting data that could not be reconciled with visual observation. Commander Vorthak's optical sensors focused intently on the tactical display as his analytical subroutines struggled to process what they were observing. Admiral, the pattern of equipment failures appears to demonstrate selective targeting that suggests intelligence-directed countermeasures. However, the delivery mechanisms remain completely unclear. How were such effects achieved without detectable technological intervention? Commander, that question brings us to the core of Dr. Chen's final defensive strategy, Kextara replied, her skin now displaying the deep purple patterns that indicated revelation of highly classified information. Post-battle analysis revealed that she had somehow achieved integration between the colony's technological systems and the planet's indigenous ecosystem at a level that created a hybrid defensive network with capabilities that exceeded either component individually. The revelation stunned the Academy audience into complete silence. The integration of biological and technological systems was a theoretical concept that had been discussed in academic circles for decades, but the technical challenges involved in creating functional hybrid networks had been considered insurmountable. The idea that such integration could be achieved during a combat situation using colonial resources stretched credibility beyond any rational limit. The evidence for this integration comes from multiple sources, Kexthara continued. Microscopic analysis of recovered hegemony equipment revealed biological contamination that appeared to interface directly with electronic components, creating modifications that changed system behavior in real time. Moreover, surveillance footage from the colony showed technological devices that exhibited biological characteristics, including apparent growth, adaptation, and response to environmental stimuli. Professor Yalmoth's tentacles had begun writhing with such intensity that other faculty members moved away to avoid being struck. Admiral, such integration would represent not merely a technological breakthrough, but a fundamental redefinition of the boundary between artificial and natural systems. The theoretical implications alone would revolutionize multiple scientific disciplines. Professor, you are correct that the theoretical implications are profound, Kexthara agreed. However, we are here to examine practical military applications rather than academic theory. The immediate effect of Dr. Chen's hybrid network was to create battlefield conditions that made conventional military operations impossible for the attacking forces. The holographic display began showing the afternoon hours of the fourth day, when the hegemony assault had devolved into complete chaos. Troops found themselves unable to maintain formation as their equipment failed in ways that prevented coordinated action. Communication breakdowns left units isolated and confused, while navigation failures made it impossible to execute tactical movements. Most disturbing was the growing sense among hegemony forces that they were being observed and influenced by systems they could not detect or understand. By evening of the fourth day, hegemony field commanders were reporting unprecedented casualties despite the absence of direct combat, Kexthara announced. Equipment failures had forced the evacuation of wounded personnel at rates that exceeded their medical capabilities, while psychological stress among troops had reached levels that required immediate intervention. Cadet Zephyr's mental projection carried notes of disbelief mixed with professional respect. Admiral, are you indicating that human defensive capabilities inflicted significant casualties without direct engagement between opposing forces? Precisely, Cadet, Kexthara confirmed. The hybrid network that Dr. Chen had created appeared capable of influencing hegemony operations in ways that produced military effects without conventional combat. Equipment failures that occurred at critical moments prevented troops from defending themselves effectively. Navigation errors led formations into hazardous terrain, and communication disruptions created confusion that resulted in friendly fire incidents. The implications were terrifying from a military perspective. If human forces could create conditions that made enemy operations self-defeating, then conventional military doctrine became not merely ineffective but actively counterproductive. The prospect of fighting an enemy that could turn your own capabilities against you represented a paradigm shift that would require complete reconceptualization of strategic planning. Fleet Admiral Thakmar's response to the deteriorating situation was to authorize immediate orbital bombardment of the entire engagement area, Kexthara announced. Despite standing orders to preserve colonial infrastructure, he concluded that the continuation of ground operations had become militarily untenable. The decision represented the ultimate admission of failure for a military force that had expected routine success. When overwhelming numerical and technological superiority proved insufficient to achieve objectives against a vastly smaller defender, the only remaining option was the complete destruction of everything in the operational area. The orbital bombardment began at dawn on the fifth day, Kextera continued as the display showed massive energy beams striking the planet's surface around the colony. 237 ships concentrated their firepower on an area of approximately 50 square kilometers, delivering destructive force equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons. The bombardment should have ended the engagement decisively. No defensive system in galactic history had ever survived concentrated orbital fire from a fleet of such magnitude. The energy delivered to the target area was sufficient to vaporize entire cities, leaving nothing but molten rock where the colony had once stood. Instead, something occurred that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of defensive capabilities. As the orbital bombardment continued, it became apparent that the energy being directed at the planet's surface was somehow being absorbed or redirected rather than causing the expected destruction. Hegemony weapons officers reported anomalous readings that suggested their energy output was being attenuated by unknown means, Kextera explained. Despite maintaining maximum power levels, the destructive effects observed on the planet's surface were significantly less than theoretical calculations predicted. The display showed the incredible sight of orbital bombardment striking an area that seemed to absorb energy like a sponge absorbing water. Instead of the expected devastation, the target area showed signs of unusual activity that suggested the incoming energy was being converted into other forms rather than released as destructive force. Supreme Fleet Admiral Corvain's appendages had become completely rigid with concentration as his ancient mind struggled to process the implications. Admiral, are you suggesting that Dr. Chen's hybrid network possessed energy absorption capabilities that could attenuate orbital bombardment? Such capabilities would represent defensive technology that exceeds anything in galactic civilization. Kextera's skin had settled into patterns that indicated she was sharing information that challenged her own understanding of physical possibility. Supreme Admiral, post-engagement analysis by our best theoretical physicists suggests that the hybrid network had somehow created resonance effects between the planet's indigenous ecosystem and the incoming energy. Rather than absorbing the bombardment directly, the network appeared to distribute the energy across vast underground root systems that converted destructive force into accelerated biological processes. The revelation was staggering. If accurate, it meant that Dr. Chen had found ways to transform weapons designed to destroy life into energy sources that actually enhanced biological systems. Such capabilities represented not merely defensive innovation, but a fundamental redefinition of the relationship between technology and nature. The orbital bombardment continued for 6 hours before Fleet Admiral Thakmar was forced to acknowledge that his weapons were ineffective, Kextera announced. His final report to Hegemony High Command stated that continued operations would serve no military purpose and recommended immediate withdrawal from the system. The Academy audience sat in stunned silence as the implications of total hegemony defeat settled in their consciousness. A force that should have achieved victory within hours had been not merely repelled, but forced to abandon their objectives entirely by a single human defending a colonial settlement with improvised capabilities. Dr. Sarah Chen's final transmission to the hegemony fleet was brief, Kextera concluded, displaying the text of the message that had ended the engagement. It read simply, "Hope's colony remains under human control. Your presence in this system is no longer welcome. Safe travels." The message's casual tone made its implications even more profound. Rather than expressing triumph or defiance, Chen had addressed the defeated fleet with the polite dismissal one might offer to unwelcome guests. The confidence implied by such language suggested that the defense of Hope's end had not represented her maximum capabilities, but merely what was necessary to achieve the desired result. As the third day's presentation concluded, the Academy audience struggled to process what they had witnessed. They had come to learn about military tactics and, instead, discovered evidence that human capabilities extended far beyond anything that galactic civilization had previously imagined. The story of Dr. Sarah Chun was forcing them to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare, the potential of biological systems, and the hidden capabilities of a species they had thought they understood. The fourth day of Admiral Kextara's presentation found the Galactic Military Academy transformed into the epicenter of the most significant strategic discussion in known history. Representatives from every major civilization had arrived, including diplomatic observers from species that had never before shown interest in Academy proceedings. Emergency session protocols had been activated, expanding the venue to accommodate delegates whose presence indicated that this briefing had transcended military analysis to become a matter of galactic security. Admiral Kextara entered Lecture Hall 7 to find Supreme Fleet Admiral Corvain flanked by the commanders of 6 different species military forces, while diplomatic attaches from the Galactic Council occupied specially designated observation areas. The presence of First Speaker Veltar, the Council's highest-ranking official, confirmed that the implications of Dr. Sarah Chen's capabilities had reached the highest levels of galactic governance. Today's session will examine the aftermath of the Hope's End engagement and its implications for future strategic planning. Kextara announced, her skin displaying formal patterns that indicated the gravity of the information she was about to reveal. Before we proceed, I must inform you that portions of today's material have been declassified specifically for this presentation at the direct authorization of the Galactic Council's Strategic Assessment Committee. The announcement sent a ripple of anticipation through the assembled audience. Information that had been classified at such high levels was rarely shared outside the most secure military planning sessions, indicating that the strategic implications of Chen's capabilities were considered too significant to remain within normal intelligence channels. First Speaker Veltar, an ancient being whose species had helped establish the current galactic order, raised one of her crystalline appendages. Admiral Kextara, before we examine strategic implications, the Council requires clarification regarding the current status of Dr. Sarah Chun and any similar capabilities that may exist within human military systems. Kextara's skin shifted through multiple colors before settling on patterns that indicated she was sharing information at the absolute limit of her authorization. First Speaker, Dr. Chen remains on Hope's End colony, where she continues her officially designated role as a xenobiologist. However, intelligence assessments suggest that her capabilities represent training and knowledge that exists within broader human military doctrine rather than unique individual innovation. The implications were staggering. If Chen's abilities were representative of standard human military capabilities rather than exceptional individual talent, then every strategic balance calculation in the galaxy required immediate revision. The possibility that Earth possessed military doctrines capable of producing such results suggested that humanity's strategic value and threat potential have been catastrophically underestimated by every major civilization. Today we will examine 3 critical areas. Kextara continued, activating the holographic display to show a star map that encompassed the known galaxy. First, the immediate aftermath of the hegemony's withdrawal and its effects on regional power balances. Second, the intelligence assessments regarding human military capabilities that have emerged from analysis of the engagement. Third, the strategic recommendations that have been proposed for managing relations with Earth in light of these revelations. The star map zoomed in to show the outer rim territories where the Hope's End engagement had taken place. The region had previously been considered strategically insignificant, populated primarily by colonial settlements and minor trade routes that attracted little attention from major powers. However, the display now showed massive changes in territorial control and strategic positioning that had occurred in the months following the hegemony's defeat. The immediate effect of the hegemony's withdrawal was to create a power vacuum in the outer rim that multiple civilizations moved to fill, Kextara explained. However, what emerged was not the expected competition for territorial control, but rather a widespread reluctance to establish military presence in areas adjacent to human colonial settlements. The holographic display showed the new territorial boundaries that had emerged following the engagement. Instead of the typical expansion patterns that would follow military defeat, the region around Hope's End had become what intelligence analysts termed a strategic exclusion zone, an area that major powers actively avoided despite its lack of obvious defensive capabilities. Commander Vorthak's optical sensors focused on the territorial display with mechanical precision. Admiral, the exclusion pattern suggests strategic calculations based on threat assessment rather than respect for territorial boundaries. Are you indicating that the Hope's End engagement has altered threat evaluations for human colonial presence throughout the Outer Rim? Precisely, Commander, Kextara confirmed. Intelligence assessments from 6 different civilizations indicate that Dr. Chen's capabilities are now assumed to represent standard human colonial defensive doctrine. As a result, territories that were previously considered easy targets for expansion have been reclassified as strategically problematic. Professor Yalmoth's tentacles writhed with scholarly excitement as he examined the strategic implications. Admiral, such widespread tactical reassessment suggests that the engagement has fundamentally altered the perceived military capabilities of human civilization. Are we witnessing a paradigm shift in galactic power balance calculations? Kextara gestured toward the display, which began showing intelligence reports from multiple sources throughout the galaxy. The documents revealed a pattern of strategic revision that extended far beyond the Outer Rim territories where the engagement had occurred. Analysis of diplomatic communications from the past 6 months indicates that human territorial claims are now being evaluated using threat assessment protocols previously reserved for major military powers, Kextara explained. Trade negotiations, resource allocation agreements, and even routine diplomatic protocols have been modified to account for the possibility that human settlements may possess defensive capabilities that exceed conventional military doctrine. The implications were profound. If humanity was now being treated as a major military power rather than a developing civilization, then Earth's position within the galactic community had been fundamentally transformed by a single colonial engagement. The strategic advantages and responsibilities that came with such recognition would reshape human relations with every other species in known space. Cadet Zephyra projected her thoughts with the focused intensity that had marked her evolution throughout the presentation series. Admiral, such strategic reassessment implies intelligence estimates regarding broader human military capabilities. What assessments have been made regarding Earth's actual defensive potential? Kextara's skin displayed patterns that indicated she was approaching the most classified aspects of her briefing. Cadet, that question brings us to the second major area of today's presentation. Intelligence assessments regarding human military capabilities have undergone complete revision following analysis of the Hope's End engagement. The holographic display shifted to show Earth itself, surrounded by what appeared to be a complex analysis of defensive capabilities, population centers, and strategic resources. The assessment bore little resemblance to previous intelligence estimates that had categorized humanity as a developing civilization with limited military potential. Current intelligence estimates suggest that if Dr. Chen's capabilities represent standard human military doctrine, then Earth's defensive potential may exceed that of any known civilization, Kextara announced, her voice carrying the weight of information that challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic power structures. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled audience. Earth had been considered strategically interesting primarily due to humanity's rapid technological development and unique biological characteristics. The possibility that human military capabilities might exceed those of civilizations that had been perfecting warfare for millennia represented a complete inversion of established strategic calculations. Supreme Fleet Admiral Corvain's appendages had become completely rigid as his ancient mind processed the implications. Admiral, such assessments would indicate that humanity represents a potential threat to galactic stability. What evidence supports estimates of such magnitude? Supreme Admiral, the evidence comes from multiple analytical approaches, Kextara replied. manipulating the display to show detailed technical assessments. First, extrapolation from DR. Chen's demonstrated capabilities suggest that human military doctrine may include biological integration techniques that could be scaled to planetary defense systems. Second, analysis of human technological development patterns indicates research into areas that other civilizations have not explored. Third, demographic studies suggest that human population centers could support military capabilities that exceed current intelligence estimates by several orders of magnitude. The technical assessments revealed analytical projections that were terrifying in their implications. If humanity possessed the ability to integrate planetary ecosystems into defensive networks, then Earth itself might be impregnable against conventional assault. Moreover, human colonial expansion could represent not merely territorial growth, but the establishment of an integrated defensive network that spanned multiple star systems. The third area of today's presentation addresses strategic recommendations that have been proposed for managing relations with Earth in light of these assessments. Kextera continued. These recommendations have been developed by the Galactic Council's Strategic Planning Committee in consultation with military advisors from 12 different civilizations. The display showed a complex diplomatic framework that bore no resemblance to the standard protocols used for managing relations with developing civilizations. Instead, the recommended approaches appear to be based on procedures designed for managing relationships between major powers with the potential for mutual destruction. The primary recommendation is for immediate elevation of humanity to Category 1 civilization status within the Galactic Council's classification system, Kextera announced. This would grant Earth full voting rights, territorial sovereignty guarantees, and access to advanced technology sharing programs that are normally restricted to civilizations with proven military capabilities. The recommendation represented a quantum leap in diplomatic status that typically required centuries of demonstrated technological and military achievement. The proposal to grant such recognition based on a single engagement indicated that the strategic implications of Chen's capabilities were considered too significant to manage through normal diplomatic channels. First speaker Veltar's crystalline structure resonated with harmonics that indicated deep contemplation. Admiral, such elevation would represent unprecedented diplomatic acceleration. What safeguards have been proposed to ensure that enhanced status does not create destabilizing effects within the galactic community? First speaker, the safeguards proposed focus on integration rather than isolation, Kextera replied. The Strategic Assessment Committee recommends immediate invitation for human participation in galactic defense planning, joint research programs into the biological integration techniques demonstrated at Hope's End, and establishment of cultural exchange programs designed to promote mutual understanding. The approach represented a fundamental shift from traditional galactic diplomacy, which typically emphasized gradual integration over extended periods. The proposal to immediately involve humanity in strategic planning indicated recognition that Earth's capabilities made traditional diplomatic approaches inadequate for managing the relationship. However, alternative recommendations have also been proposed. Kextera continued, her skin shifting to darker patterns that indicated the discussion of more problematic possibilities. Some strategic planners have suggested that human capabilities represent a potential threat that requires active containment rather than integration. The alternative approaches revealed on the display were chilling in their implications. Proposals for technological monitoring, territorial restrictions, and even preemptive action against human expansion indicated that some elements within galactic civilization viewed humanity's newfound capabilities as fundamentally threatening rather than potentially beneficial. Professor Yalmoth's tentacles had stopped their writhing and were now held in rigid attention as he examined the strategic alternatives. Admiral, containment approaches would likely be interpreted by humanity as hostile actions. Given the demonstrated capabilities at Hope's End, would such policies not risk creating the very threat they are intended to prevent? Professor, your observation touches on the central strategic dilemma that the Galactic Council now faces, Kextera agreed. Traditional threat management approaches may be counterproductive when applied to a civilization whose defensive capabilities appear to increase under pressure. The holographic display shifted to show analysis of human historical patterns, revealing a species whose response to external pressure consistently involved innovation and adaptation rather than capitulation. The implications for containment strategies were clear. Attempting to restrict human capabilities would likely result in the development of even more advanced countermeasures. Current assessments suggest that humanity's response to containment efforts would be to accelerate development of the biological integration techniques demonstrated by Dr. Chun, Kextera explained. Intelligence projections indicate that such acceleration could result in human capabilities that exceed even current worst-case estimates. Cadet Zephyr's mental projection carried notes of concern that reflected the growing anxiety among younger military officers. Admiral, if containment is counterproductive and integration carries risks of its own, what strategic approach offers the best probability of maintaining galactic stability? Kextera's skin displayed the complex patterns that indicated she was sharing the most crucial aspects of her briefing. Cadet, that question has generated extensive debate among strategic planners. The emerging consensus favors what is being termed collaborative engagement, an approach that emphasizes partnership and mutual benefit rather than traditional power balance maintenance. The collaborative engagement protocol shown on the display represented a completely new approach to interspecies relations. Instead of the careful balance of power that had characterized galactic politics for millennia, the proposed framework emphasized shared research, joint military exercises, and integrated planning for mutual defense. The theoretical foundation for collaborative engagement rests on the assessment that human capabilities represent opportunities rather than threats when properly channeled, Kextera explained. If biological integration techniques can be developed through cooperative research, the resulting capabilities could benefit all galactic civilizations rather than providing strategic advantages to humanity alone. The approach required unprecedented levels of trust and cooperation between species that had traditionally maintained strategic independence. However, the alternative, attempting to manage a civilization whose capabilities exceeded conventional military doctrine through traditional balance of power approaches, appeared to offer even greater risks. The final recommendation addresses the immediate practical question of how to implement collaborative engagement while maintaining galactic security, Kextera announced. The Strategic Planning Committee has proposed the establishment of joint research facilities, integrated defense planning committees, and cultural exchange programs that would create institutional frameworks for managing the relationship. As the fourth day's presentation concluded, the Academy audience found themselves confronting strategic decisions that would reshape the future of galactic civilization. The story of Dr. Sarah Chun and the defense of Hope's End had evolved from a military case study into evidence that the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic politics might require complete revision. The questions facing military and diplomatic planners were no longer about tactics or technology, but about the basic principles that would govern relationships between civilizations whose capabilities differed so dramatically from established norms. The answer would determine whether humanity's emergence as a major power would strengthen or destabilize the galactic community for generations to come. The fifth and final day of Admiral Kextera's unprecedented presentation found the Galactic Military Academy hosting the largest gathering of military and diplomatic minds in recorded galactic history. The venue had been expanded to accommodate representatives from every known civilization, while additional facilities throughout the Academy complex provided holographic access to observers who could not physically attend. The presence of the full Galactic Council, meeting in emergency session for only the third time in 2 millennia, confirmed that the implications of Dr. Sarah Chen's capabilities had transcended military analysis to become a matter of fundamental importance to galactic civilization itself. Admiral Kextera entered the primary assembly hall to find herself facing an audience that included not only military commanders and strategic analysts, but Also philosophers, sociologists, and xenobiological researchers whose expertise had become suddenly relevant to questions of galactic security. The expansion of attendees reflected recognition that the Hope's end engagement had implications that extended far beyond conventional military doctrine into areas that touched the very foundations of how civilizations understood warfare, technology, and the relationship between species. Today's session will conclude our analysis of the Hope's end engagement and address its long-term implications for galactic civilization. Kextera announced, her skin displaying formal patterns that indicated the historical significance of the moment. However, before we proceed, I must inform you that the presentation has been designated as a watershed event in galactic strategic planning. The information shared here will become the foundation for policy decisions that will affect interspecies relations for generations to come. First speaker Veltar, representing the assembled Galactic Council, activated her species' formal communication protocols to address the gathering. Admiral Kextera, the Council has authorized me to confirm that the strategic implications of your analysis have prompted fundamental review of the principles that govern Inter.